It's time for Talking Michigan Transportation, a podcast devoted to the conversations with people at the forefront of the ongoing mobility revolution. In the state that put the world on wheels, here's your host, MDOT Communications Director, Jeff Cranson.
Hi, this is Jeff Cranson. Welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation podcast. This week, I'm very privileged to have with me Ken Sikkema, former Senate Majority Leader and longtime legislator from my neck of the woods in West Michigan, and Bob Emerson, a former Senate Minority Leader and the Budget Director under Jennifer Granholm. And we're here to talk about some interesting proposals that a group that they chair put forth early in the year to solve our decades-long transportation funding crisis, and talk about where that's going, where it hasn't gone yet, but they're still keeping up the fight, and everything else related to transportation funding. So thank you both for taking time to do this. Let's start with the question that I posed to Chad Livengood a couple weeks ago when we talked about this, and why do you think this is so difficult? Why has it taken so long, and why is it so hard in Michigan to get agreement on, something as basic as fixing our roads?
Well, I think the biggest part of the problem is that fixing the roads requires money and additional money. And I think in recent years it's become even more difficult for the legislature to come to terms with the need to raise revenue for anything. And it was pointed out to us earlier today that we're about $10 billion below the Headley limit, which years ago was considered to be a very conservative proposal on trying to limit state revenue. And so we're about $10 billion below that limit now, but still everybody is of the mind that you don't raise taxes of any sort. And in order to
some
get...
even take a pledge.
Yeah, and I always found pledges to be kind of silly when I was running for office, because you never know what the future is going to bring and what kind of circumstances you're going to run into that are going to force you to violate whatever pledge you've taken. But I think, and it's just a difficult thing to have to go back and try and explain to people why this is necessary. But it's been so many years since there were any increases in road taxes. Cars have gotten a lot more fuel efficient. People are spending less on gasoline than they used to because cars are much more efficient. And so I think, it just becomes a very, very difficult political process to have to go through to try and convince people that, that amount of new revenue is needed. And when we looked at the issue, I think Ken can get into it, but everybody we had doing research, we had looked at the Citizens Research Council, talked with all the fiscal agencies, talked with anybody who had done any research on what was needed in Michigan, and came up with a dollar amount that was pretty much staggering. Even when we looked at it, the amount of money that was needed to fix the roads. So,
well, it was pretty comparable to what the governor finally arrived at in terms of the cents. You guys came up with 47 cents. She came up with 45. The difference is you were going to phase yours in over 9 years.
Well, and that's probably a big difference in the sense that I think it's far more politically palatable to phase something like that in over a period of time. I think it also makes economic sense to phase it in and not try to do everything all at once. But Bob is absolutely right. I mean, the roads don't fix themselves. They're going to cost money. It's an expensive proposition to bring Michigan roads up to where they need to be, and then to sustain them at that level. And it means you have to raise taxes. It's just that simple. Now, the complication is it's politically hard. We understand that. And as Bob said, when we looked at the need and realized what it was going to take to fix the roads, to solve the problem, we gulped kind of hard, which is kind of what led us to look at a phase-in. But it's hard politically, but it still has to be done. We still have to fix the roads in this state.
So your years in the House and the Senate, you weren't known as a particularly fond of taxes as a solution to problems. How hard was it for you to take that vote in 1997 for the 4-cent increase?
Well, look, I'm a Republican, and that means that all taxes are bad, but some are necessary. And this falls into the necessary category. So In 1997, I was House Republican leader. John Engler was governor. We raised the gas tax. And it was done on the House side with half of the votes were Republicans and half of the votes were Democrats on the House side. And in the Senate, it was by and large Republican votes and then a Republican governor signing into law. But I'll be very candid that when I had my finger over that green button, I'm thinking, oh man, the people back home in Granville aren't going to like this. But I didn't hear one peep of dissent from my constituents.
So how often in talking with legislators since then about this problem have you made that point? That nobody nationwide has lost an election because of a gas tax vote?
Well, sometimes it's like you're speaking to deaf ears. I mean, I think every elected official, in this case we're talking representatives and senators here at the Capitol, they have their own political filter. And with term limits, they're thinking of the next office. So they're concerned about it and worried about it. They don't want to cast a controversial vote. Nobody ever does, even before term limits. But sometimes, like I said, all taxes are bad, but some are necessary. That's sort of I would characterize the vote that way. It's a necessary thing to do because, look, nobody got drafted to run for office. Everybody enlisted, and it's part of your responsibility.
And I'd say it's part of your responsibility to tell people what they don't want to hear sometimes, and that's that these roads aren't going to fix themselves. So, Bob, talk about this plan. Became known as the Grumpy Old Men Plan, which I thought was a little unfair to John Cherry and Paul Hilligans. But talk about that and what it is about your years of experience that gave you kind of the wisdom and the oversight to see your way to this 47 cents solution.
Well, as I said earlier, every research study that we had looked at said the problem was at least $2.5 billion. And as you looked at that problem to come up with a solution, required you to come up with $2.5 billion. And we didn't think, and certainly I didn't think, having been budget director, that you could squeeze $2.5 billion out of other places in the budget. Plus, we had traditionally used a user fee, which was gas taxes, to pay for roads. And that made a lot more sense where you could connect the use of the money with where the money was derived. And when we looked at it, $2.5 billion was a lot of money to try and come up with. And as Ken said, we looked at phasing it in because as former leaders of caucuses, we knew you could get people to vote for something, but you couldn't get them to vote for the whole $2.5 billion at once. At least I didn't think you could. And I think that's kind of been proven with the discussions that have gone on in the legislature with them looking at 45 cents in a very short period of time. I think even the most liberal members and the people who would most likely vote for taxes were having a hard time coming up with that.
Yeah. Well, so did you guys in your presentations and the people that came in and talked to you, the experts, talk about something besides the gas tax? There's a story out of Washington State today that after piloting a vehicle miles traveled tax for a while, they've decided to go ahead with it and maybe seek legislation. It's been piloted other places. That goes to your point earlier about cars becoming more efficient. We're not going to be a tolling state anytime soon. But, the gas tax is the best thing we have now in terms of a user fee. But if we really want to make people that drive pay for what they drive, in other words, the people who use the roads most pay the most, vehicle miles traveled would be the ultimate solution.
Yeah, we looked at that. And that was one of the solutions. I believe they're trying that method out in Oregon, and they are working out some of the kinks on that. We think it takes a long time to implement that program, to retrofitting every car in the state, with the technology that's needed to monitor how many miles were driven in the state.
There's the big brother factor.
And that was the one that, I sort of said, I don't know how we ever passed something like that, because I remember discussions we had years ago about trying to put up cameras at stoplights where there were considerable accidents where people were running red lights and making left turns on red lights that they shouldn't have been making. And so we were looking at trying to install those, and we got into all kinds of civil liberty questions. You had people on both the right and the left complaining that you had Big Brother going to give you a ticket without anybody ever seeing you do something, just a camera, and how do you know it was me behind the wheel, all those sorts of things. And I think you run into sort of the same thing when you're doing the vehicle miles driven thing. It's going to take a while for people to get used to the fact that the state is not monitoring, which bar you went to, whether you were cheating on your wife, any of those sorts of things, or cheating on your husband, I guess,
You've
too.
thought of all kinds of things that I didn't even think about in terms of vehicle miles.
We had some lively discussions.
It was one of those things that we said we really need to go to at some point in time because it's probably a much more accurate measure of usage of the roads. The real question is, how do you get there? And because we saw the need as being immediate, we needed an answer today, not something that you could phase in over 10 years like vehicle miles driven.
Yeah, we looked at all kinds of options: sales tax, income tax, property tax, the gas tax, the vehicle miles driven concept. Taking a look at the fact where more vehicles are becoming electric vehicles or hybrid. But at the end of the day, as Bob said, we wanted to keep it a user fee as best we could. We thought that was the fairest way to go. And really, in the short and kind of near term, the gas tax, tried and true, still is the best user fee to use at this point in time. Now, if things change down the road, if 50% of the fleet becomes electric, if this technology of vehicle miles driven becomes more acceptable, then the legislature and the governor at the time can make that transition. But we felt, after looking at all of the options, hearing a lot of pros and cons to the different options, that still the gas tax in the near and short term was really the best user fee to stick with.
And the problem in Michigan, as you know, is that we put our sales tax on gas and most states don't. We're one of only a handful of states that does that, and that makes our actual price on the gas tax seem much higher than it is, and it makes it easy for opponents to say, my goodness, if you tack this much on top of it, we'll be way ahead of everybody. That's misleading because of the 6% sales tax, and I'm sure you guys talked about that too, how that came to be.
Well, it's a complicating factor for Michigan, but it's also, when people raise it, it tends, the people that raise it a lot tend to use it as a diversionary issue, so they don't really have to face the sort of the fundamental fact we have to raise taxes to fix the roads. And even on any given day, the fluctuation, on any given day, the difference in gas prices between gas stations within a mile or two of each other is really dramatic.
Yeah.
When we published our recommendation almost a year ago now, on the day we published it, where I live in Granville, there was a 30-cent difference in price between stations within 2 miles of each other.
Wow.
And of course, the fluctuation day to day is dramatic.
But it's also the thing we're most cognizant of. No other
Yeah,
retail
and-
product screams at us on the street corner how much it is. So
Well,
it's
and the
not-
other thing
it's-
about the gas tax that we thought had value in terms of continuing to use it is that you pay a little bit at a time. It's not like a registration fee or your state income tax. It's just more palatable, I think, for the average motorist and voter.
Yeah. So going forward, trying to look forward, where do you guys think this goes from here? What's your crystal ball tell you?
Well, it's hard to tell, because looking at it from the outside, it looks like we have a mess, and I think the mess really stems from the inability of people to talk to each other. And part of the reason we created the Consensus Policy Project was to show that people with pretty diverse views can still talk to each other and try and figure out how to come to consensus on major issues that face the state. No one would ever mistake Ken for a Democrat. I don't think anybody would even
Maybe
think,
in his WMEAC days.
yeah, but nobody's going to confuse me with a Republican. I still have a basic philosophy, but within that philosophy has got to be the ability to achieve consensus on issues. This country was founded with people who had incredibly diverse views. Back then, some of them even shot each other over them.
Yeah.
They found that the secret to governing was figuring out a way to come to a consensus.
So in fairness to today's leaders, did you guys get along as well when you were on opposite sides of the aisle as you do now?
We probably get along better now than we did then, but
you still had a cordial
I think we
relationship?
still had a relationship where we talked with each other, and part of that was due to the fact that we had served with each other for 20 years, and developed a relationship. Today I'm not sure most of these people know what anybody else's wife's name is, or what their kids, or how many kids they have, or that sort of thing, or have ever had.
When Vern Ehlers left Congress, he cited that as what he saw as the biggest problem in D.C., that very thing, that people aren't going out to dinner with each other and getting to know each other's families, and, they fly home now.
Well, you got to find out that people are human, even though you got a different position on issues, you still got, similar human issues that you all have to deal with, and it helps you understand a little better if there's conversation, where somebody's coming from.
It feels like a different political world today than when Bob and I served. As he pointed out, on the surface, there's probably it's hard to find two people who are more different than he and I. He's from Flint, I'm from West Michigan. He was raised Catholic, I was raised Protestant. He, started out working for the union. I didn't know what a union was. He's Democrat, I'm Republican. And there are probably even more differences. But I think we sort of had a common idea of government, that you're there to solve a problem. So you asked, did you get along as well when you served? Well, we probably had some words at times back then, but to be honest with you, we got along pretty well. We knew what we were there for. We had to pass budgets, had to get things done, and there was kind of that unifying, I guess, principle, if you will, to our day-to-day work. And it just, Bob characterizes it as, it's, you kind of wonder if people are talking to each other right now. That's a foreign concept to me, that if they're not.
So one of the reasons we know for this, that not having that longevity and having time to create those relationships, is our very restrictive term limits, among the most restrictive in the country. Is that something the project is taking on?
We have not talked about that. I think, that really is an issue where we can talk about it, but I think leadership on that issue needs to come from somebody other than former legislators. I think people in the public, the original term limits didn't originate from the legislature. I don't think the correction to that is going to originate from the legislature or former legislators. But we've talked about the fact that I think part of the reason things don't work as well today is term limits. When the four of us originally got together, John Cherry and Paul Hilligans and Ken and I, we all had served with each other for 14, 15, 16 years, and in some cases more than that. And I always go back to when in 1994, when we passed Proposal A, the whole proposal was the people who came up with that were 14 people in the House, 7 Democrats, 7 Republicans. So I looked at it, and the average tenure of each of those people was about 12 years. We had one person who had only served 2 years, but he was a former superintendent, Jim Agee.
He understood the issue.
So he understood school financing fairly well. Everybody else had been in the legislature at least 10 years. And so they knew each other. They knew what that was acceptable to their constituents. They knew, where they could compromise, where they couldn't. And I think term limits today limits people's ability to feel that comfortable in dealing with each other.
Well, so do you see happening next year or sometime after that? Speaking of Proposal a similar situation where, the governor and legislature agreed, like, let's do this, but let's take it to the voters, but not as a yes or no, but as an either-or proposition?
Talking about road funding?
Yeah, for road
I think
funding.
that's a possibility. But was the key feature of school finance reform 25 years ago was, you can't just vote no. You got to pick your poison in terms of how to solve the problem. And I think that can be a possibility. But you asked earlier, if you look in your crystal ball about road funding, what do you see? Well, I look at my crystal ball and it looks awfully murky. In terms of term limits, I'd like to see us make a little bit more progress on road funding before we tackle term limits.
I know. I was thinking the two are kind of tied together, but I understand.
But I could see a ballot proposal that says, pick one of these two options in terms of funding to fix the roads. I prefer, and one of the reasons we settled in on the gas tax, not the only reason, but one of them was because the legislature and the governor could do it. They didn't have to go to the voters. My preference is the people whose job it is to solve the problem, solve the problem.
Yeah, with so many other agencies and so many other public policy challenges, in a way, this one's easier because transportation has a historic success with the gas tax as a user fee, and there's not many other things you can tie to a user fee that like you can with transportation. That's why it makes sense. So what do you think about this? Something I've thought about for a long time, and I offer it up to people, and they always say, that's interesting. What if we went to a public service commission model? We don't have to go to the legislature to keep the lights on. Why do we have to go to the legislature to get our roads fixed?
Well, you'd have to change a whole lot of history,
Sure.
And I think.
But you don't hear people talking about their electric rates going up or their, or their cable or their phone. Maybe we grouse a little, but we're not nearly as aware of it as we are the gas tax.
Well,
we just take it for granted, right? They got together and.
I think people do grouse a bit about it.
Sure, they do, but
if government were in charge of making that decision, you'd probably hear a lot more about it, since you have private companies making the decisions on what rates are going to be.
Right.
I have joked with my spouse about the fact that, I remember 30 years ago when you had a telephone attached to your wall in your kitchen or next to your sofa in the living room, and somebody would make a long distance call or two, and you'd complain that the phone bill was $30. And you got to stop making those calls.
Right.
Somehow it's gotten too much, and now, I pay $230 a month, for a cell phone that does about everything, I can think of, and the private companies have figured out ways to make us want this even more. I think the roads and the condition of the roads are making people want them fixed, and the real question is, how do you find the revenue to fix it? And, we thought the gas tax made sense. I don't think you can continually take money out of the budget. Having been budget director, I know I couldn't have found $1 billion in the budget that made sense to take out. And clearly, you have a lot of disagreement in the legislature today about whether or not that budget was a serious budget that ended up being passed.
Yeah, so what is it you said you did on your first day as budget director?
Well, so you could eliminate a lot of the discussion because everybody thinks there's so much waste, fraud, and abuse in state government that I ordered my staff to go out and eliminate every line item in the state budget that had waste, fraud, and abuse in it.
Yeah.
And so I eliminated all the waste, fraud, and abuse
So
in state
thanks
government.
again for doing that.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's reinstated it. But, there is certainly, in anybody's mind, you could identify some excess spending somewhere in state government, but you're not going to find $1 billion.
Well, my idea of the PSC model is just that at some point, the legislature would get tired of this issue always hanging around. And if you indexed it in 1997, if it had been 12 cents an index for inflation, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. So
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the idea of a non-elected body having the authority, the ability to raise the gas tax. As Bob said, not only would you have to reverse a lot of history in terms of how you fund the roads and who's accountable, but you'd have to create the body. And so now the debate, rather than having a debate about how to fix the roads, it's a debate about, well, how much authority do they have? And do you cap their ability to raise it at 5 cents each year or 5 cents over 10 years? And I'm not a fan of a non-elected body.
because the system we have now has worked so well.
Well, it's democracy, as Winston Churchill said, it's a lousy form of government, but it's the best,
yeah.
And even in the past, I mean, raising the gas tax in 1997 wasn't a piece of cake, and it just didn't happen overnight.
It was a heavy lift.
Yeah, and it was, and it happened over time. And after we got through all the debate about, well, let's first get the waste, fraud, and abuse out of government. Well, what about the warranties? Well, how come M6 has to be rebuilt? I mean, all of those kinds of debates. We finally got through them all and said, yeah, we still need some money.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion we'll have to have sometime, since you're so familiar with M6 and why it is that Michigan has this incredibly robust road warranty program and no other state does it. So,
well, it was just an example.
I know, but I mean that's a whole nother, that's a really interesting topic. So anyway, thanks for doing this. I'm hoping that I'll get to have you guys back again when something does pass and we can talk about it and what the project is moving on to. Did you have any parting thoughts, Bob?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Okay, thanks.
No, I appreciate the chance, and I force myself to be mildly optimistic that we're going to be able to solve this problem.
Even though the crystal ball is murky.
Murky crystal ball. But
Well, thank you both. Thanks again for listening, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Talking Michigan Transportation.
That's a wrap for this edition of Talking Michigan Transportation. Check out show notes and more on SoundCloud or by subscribing on Apple Podcasts.